Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're all about plunging into fascinating topics, really trying to pull out those nuanced insights you need me to gain a fresh perspective. Today, we're going back, way back, to what many consider a foundational text for, well, understanding human civilization as it's laid out in the Bible. We're talking Genesis 10, verses 1 to 5. You might know it as the Table of Nations. Our goal: to unlock what this ancient passage suggests about our origins, how humanity spread out, and maybe see if these old accounts hold, surprising ideas for us today. And let's be clear, this isn't just some dusty list of names according to the sources we're looking at. It's seen as packed with meaning. Just a note as we dive in, we're exploring this through the lens of historical and theological interpretations, understanding the insights drawn from it within those traditions, not pushing any one view ourselves.
Yeah, and what's so compelling about this bit, Genesis 10.1 to 5, is really its role as a foundational text within that tradition. It kind of sets a framework, doesn't it, for understanding not just early human history as the Bible presents it, but also, well, all the diversity we see around us today. For many interpreters, it's definitely seen as part of a, let's say, a larger divine plan. So it's not just about tracing old tribes, but for those studying it, it's almost like a blueprint. A blueprint for our shared roots, the design behind the human family, how the world got populated. We'll explore those big claims.
Okay, let's unpack that. That idea of a blueprint is a really good place to start, I think.
Yeah.
So Genesis 10, verse 1. At first glance, yeah, it looks like it's just repeating names from chapter 9, but it says more, right? It actually states its purpose. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and sons were born to them after the flood. Why is that phrase, the generations of the sons of Noah, seen as so, well, significant? What does it tell us right away?
It's huge, actually, because within that biblical framework, it's making this really clear statement about universal human lineage. Just think about that. This text is claiming all of humanity after the flood story comes from just these three guys, Noah's sons. That's a powerful idea, and within the tradition, it pushes back against any idea that different peoples, different races popped up separately. It hammers home this fundamental unity. And looking at how it's been interpreted, this common origin is often stressed, the idea that deep down we're all related. One family tree from this point in the narrative. It's something commentators often bring up, especially when you think about how divided the world can feel. It's also, interesting how this resonates slightly with scientific ideas like a genetic bottleneck, a time when a population shrinks right down. So everyone afterwards comes from that small group. Obviously, the biblical and scientific accounts are different things, but that shared concept of a single starting point, it's a powerful parallel people talk about.
That idea of unity from one starting point. Yeah, that's a major takeaway right there. And the sources suggest it's not just abstract, it's shown practically in the next few verses. And this is where it gets really interesting, because this passage is also seen as like the direct fulfillment of an earlier command from God. Back in Genesis 9.1, God tells Noah and his sons pretty plainly, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So how do verses 2 through 4, with all those descendants listed, show that command actually happening? How does this text describe the field getting populated?
Right, verses 2 to 4 are presented exactly as that command being worked out, fill the earth. And what strikes many scholars is the sheer detail you find here for such an ancient document.
Yeah.
You get specific names, starting with Japheth's line. Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, Teras, and then their kids in the next verses. Now, to us, some names might sound, a bit obscure, but historical research, archaeology, ancient commentaries, they've actually linked many of these names to real groups in the ancient world. Gomer, for instance, is often connected to the Sumerians, those Indo-European folks who moved into Anatolia. Javan is widely seen as the Ionian Greeks. Madai, the Medes over in ancient Iran.
Wow, okay, so these aren't just symbolic placeholders. They're seen as pointing to actual historical groups.
Exactly. And proponents of the text's reliability often point to this meticulous detail. They see it as evidence of a trustworthy, even historically grounded account for its time, tracking humanity's spread. It suggests careful record keeping, not just a vague myth. And thinking about that command, fill the earth, these verses aren't just a static list. They describe what must have been a pretty dynamic process. Our sources suggest this wasn't like, boom, everyone scattered instantly. It was probably nomadic movements, tribes expanding, new settlements being founded over generations, early societies forming clans, tribes, slowly moving into nearby areas, maybe driven by resources, population growth, perhaps even early squabbles. So this gradual but purposeful outward push is seen as that proactive fulfillment of the mandate to spread out and live everywhere. It shows a world on the move right from the start.
That paints a much richer picture, yeah. You can imagine the complexities. Okay, so digging into the specifics a bit more. Verse 5. It mentions the maritime peoples, or coastlands, and says they spread out by their clans and their own nations, each with its own language. Now, that raises a really interesting question, I think. How can it say each with its own language before the famous Tower of Babel story in Genesis 11? Isn't Babel supposed to be where all the different languages came from in this narrative?
That's a really sharp observation. And yes, you're right. It's a point that's definitely generated a lot of discussion among scholars. The sort of traditional view often puts Babel front and center as the big event for language fragmentation. But yeah, having their own language mentioned before Genesis 11 suggests maybe a more nuanced picture in the text itself. One common interpretation is that while Babel was certainly this major, maybe miraculous event causing confusion and diversification, there might have already been a natural kind of drift occurring, distinct dialects, maybe even early linguistic groups forming within the big family lines before Babel.
Ah, okay. So it's not necessarily a contradiction, but maybe a difference in scale or the type of diversification.
Precisely. You can imagine, right? A large family group spreads out, settles different areas. Over time, their speech might naturally change in little ways. Dialects emerge, even if they all started from one common tongue. That happens all the time. So the Babel event, in this view, could be seen as a sort of divinely kicked off acceleration of that, a sudden intensification, maybe making those dialects properly unintelligible to each other, or even introducing totally new language families. So it implies this divinely guided diversity was there from early on, this natural linguistic evolution within families, which was then amplified at Babel. Why? To make sure people actually did spread out instead of sticking together. It's quite an elegant way some interpreters reconcile those two accounts, Genesis 10 and 11.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. It allows for both things to be true in their own way, natural change and a big transformative event. So what does this all suggest then, according to our sources, about God's bigger plan for humanity? If this diversity was already happening, maybe even encouraged, and then Babel pushed it further, what does that tell us about how God intended for people to spread across the earth?
Well, within this biblical understanding, it says a lot about an intentional design. God wanted humanity to populate the whole planet, not just huddle in one spot. This passage, Genesis 10, is often read as a clear counterstory to that human instinct to, concentrate power and population. Think about the maritime peoples of Japheth mentioned in verse 5. That's often interpreted as referring to those who settled around the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, spreading out from the ancient Near East. They were like pioneers heading into new territories. And this early dispersion, even before Babel, is seen as strong evidence of God's hand guiding things, guiding migration, the forming of different cultures. It wasn't random, it was purposeful, a direct carrying out of that command to Noah.
And it's fascinating how that idea echoes later in the Bible too, isn't it?
Absolutely. This picture of an early guided spread sort of sets the stage for the whole world that much later the gospel message is intended to reach. It lays down a global perspective right from the start. And you mentioned echoes. Paul in Acts chapter 17 basically affirms this exact idea. He says, God made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling places. For those interpreting this theologically, it wasn't accidental. It was part of a grand design, carefully laid out, ensuring different peoples, cultures, languages would fill the whole world.
That link to Acts really underscores the consistency proponents see in the narrative. Okay, so as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into just these first 5 verses of Genesis 10, what's the main takeaway? What encouragement or, I guess, deep truth should listeners maybe glean from this list of names, which might seem a bit dry at first glance, considering all these interpretations?
Well, for me, looking at how this text is understood, it's presented as this incredible testament to the reliability of God's word for its followers and his big picture plan. This detailed list, it's not dry at all when you see it this way. It's viewed as living proof that God cares about history, specific people, fulfilling promises. It gives this deep sense of rootedness, a common origin, and in a world that feels so fractured sometimes, that's held up as a powerful reminder. We're all presented as part of one human family. This chapter reinforces that God is seen as the God of all nations. It sets the foundation for understanding the global reach of the biblical redemption story, showing this path from one family to a diverse world, all within a deliberate plan. It points to unity beneath all our differences.
And it paints a really rich picture, doesn't it, of what's seen as God's creativity and that diversity. It wasn't about creating just one identical group. The text is interpreted as showing God delighting in the different languages, the unique cultures, the varied lands, all springing from that one source. So it kind of invites us, you could say, to celebrate our own unique identities, our backgrounds, while also recognizing that fundamental shared humanity that connects everyone.
This passage, then, isn't just ancient history for its interpreters. It's a celebration of God's design and maybe a call to figure out our own place in that huge human tapestry. So we've explored today how Genesis 10.1 to 5, far from being just a list, is seen as this foundational account. Through its traditional interpretations, it makes these profound claims about human unity, the intentional spread of nations, and what's understood as God's guiding hand in history, fostering diversity. It offers a framework for thinking about origins and society.
Indeed. And maybe just one final thought to leave you with. How might reflecting on these ancient claims about shared ancestry on one hand and divinely designed diversity on the other, how might that challenge us? Challenge how we view other people, no matter where they're from, what language they speak, what culture they have? Does it encourage us to see everyone as part of this one interconnected family meant to flourish together across the whole earth? Maybe look past the surface differences to that underlying unity and shared purpose described in this narrative. Something to maybe explore further in your own lives, your interactions. What does it mean for us today in this interconnected world?